Hi everyone, good Tuesday afternoon and welcome to GoLocal Live. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for the News and Politics show this afternoon, and want to thank our Tuesday regular Jennifer Lawless, Professor of Political Science down at the University of Virginia, for Skyping in. Thank you, Jennifer.
Of course.
Well, so much to break down. Let's start at the top. Let's talk a little bit about the prospects of the Senate taking up either what was the House language or amended language pertaining to President Trump's declaration of a national emergency. Now, we saw the House basically rebuke that call. Now it goes to the Senate. It looks like they've got the Republicans to do so as well on the Senate side.
Right. There are definitely at least 4 senators who have already committed to signing on to the Democratic House legislation. Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who are not surprises, Tom Tillis from North Carolina, and Rand Paul from Kentucky, who are usually not engaged in bipartisanship. And there are at least 10 other senators who have considered it or who haven't opposed the idea of signing on. So the question becomes whether Mitch McConnell will put this up for a vote. The challenge, of course, is that in neither house, neither chamber, are there enough votes to override a presidential veto. But the question then becomes whether Donald Trump has the authority not only to skirt Congress on this, but then to veto legislation that rebukes him.
And let's talk about what that looks like if that happens. As you said, probably don't have the votes for a veto again if the Senate does now. So president goes for a veto, don't have the votes for a veto override. Is this just uncharted territory? I mean, then what?
It is uncharted because the question ultimately comes down to appropriations, and Congress constitutionally is given the power of the purse. That's where appropriations bills begin, and they're ultimately assigned the responsibility of determining what we spend money on. Mm-hmm. So this executive order, by definition, given that it's allocating funds, is already shaky. But overriding a congressional effort that says, look, we've thought about it and you can't do this, is almost sure to generate a Supreme Court decision.
And so you talk about generating a Supreme Court decision. Oftentimes we know the wheels of justice don't turn that quickly. How protracted could this get?
I think this is one of those cases where the Supreme Court would act pretty quickly because it's clear that they would have original jurisdiction, I think, over a case like this. It's not like a lower court would be suing the president. It would be a congressional committee doing it, in which case the court could hear it very, very quickly. The question is whether it's in their interest to do so. Do they really want to be in a position right now where they probably cast the kind of partisan vote that we saw in Bush v. Gore, where it further undermines separation of powers and the institutional integrity of the court?
How soon do we expect, could we expect Mitch McConnell to move on this?
With Mitch McConnell, it's tricky because traditionally he does not move forward with legislation unless he knows that he has the votes. In this case, he knows for sure that he does not have the votes that are needed to block the House legislation. The question becomes whether they can actually take up an amended form of this. And that's an open question as well. We're completely in uncharted territory there.
So let's go to the other side of the Capitol. Let's talk about the House Judiciary Probe. The number of people on that list, the announcement today of the call for the president's tax returns. And am I mistaken, was Ivanka Trump not on that list?
She was not on the list. Eric and Don Jr. were, except my understanding is that she's on another list, and one that is likely to also generate requests, if not for documents, then certainly for testimony. But basically, anybody that has ever met Donald Trump should be wondering whether they're going to get a letter from the House Judiciary Committee.
It's that expansive.
It really is. I mean, so far it's 81 of his closest friends, most of whom probably no longer consider themselves close friends. So this is an example of oversight. I think it's also an example of what happens when for 2 years there's virtually no oversight. It's pretty unheard of to issue a request for documents from such a long list of people. But keep in mind that over the course of the last 2 years, when the Republicans had control of the House, they were providing virtually no oversight and asking for virtually nothing in the way of documents. So it's important to provide that perspective. This is what happens when you've been sitting on something for a very, very long time.
Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the House as well. Rep. Omar, who we spoke about just a couple weeks ago now, with some comments she made on certain legislators' relationships with Israel. Now, the House taking up a measure this week, not particularly pertaining to Representative Omar, but I guess language sort of in general. And then, of course, we saw AOC come to Rep. Omar's defense about that this week as well. What do we see happening with this, especially now with the call for action on the House side?
Well, we've reached a point in time now where it's clear that the House, the Democrats in the House in particular, are concerned about any sort of semblance of anti-Semitic rhetoric or perceptions of anti-Semitism, or signaling that their new liberal progressive members are far more pro-Palestinian than they might be pro-Israeli. And as a result, we are seeing a high level of scrutiny, not only in what we saw with the tweet a couple of weeks ago, where there were anti-Semitic tropes used and stereotypes invoked, but also just the other day. Now, the interesting thing here is that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said that it's fine to call out anti-Semitism, but it's a little bit striking that when there are other allegations against other types of groups, there doesn't seem to be a chamber that's nearly as up in arms. And she referred in a tweet to the fact that she was told to go back to Puerto Rico. And there didn't seem to be any sort of uproar regarding that. So I think the Democrats are finding themselves in a position where if they are going to call out their members, they probably have to do it a little bit more broadly than they currently are. That said, I don't think there's anything to suggest that they haven't acted appropriately when it comes to, snuffing out anti-Semitism.
One of the things that AOC had mentioned as well was one of her colleagues calling into line Rep. Omar's even questioning of the American-Israeli relationships amongst them, and that she took to task that when does it become all of a sudden wrong to question? Is it again the nuance and the delivery of how Rep. Omar had sort of made these accusations?
I think the delivery and the tone matter. I also think that if the tweet from a couple of weeks ago had not set the stage for this general sense that maybe there's some underlying anti-Semitism, the reaction to this particular incident probably wouldn't have been as, loud as it was.
Let's talk a little bit, couple more topics. Want to catch you on while we have you here. The Democratic candidate palooza for 2020, if you will. Seeing John Hickenlooper get into the race as well as Jay Inslee. And I know you keep saying Biden's the wild card, but how big is this field going to grow?
Well, I have to tell you that while you were just speaking, I can break some breaking news. Politico broke it, but I just saw it. Mike Bloomberg has announced that he will not run.
Okay.
So in the last 2 days, Mike Bloomberg and Hillary Clinton have both taken themselves out of the running. I still think that Joe Biden remains the wild card, but when we think about Inslee or Hickenlooper, as we get more and more of these candidates, I think there are two dynamics that become tricky for everyone. The first is, how do you break through? People don't know who they are, and frankly, governors have a harder time building national name recognition than senators because they're known very well in one state, but rarely do other states cover what the chief executive of a neighboring or a state across the country is doing. And so that's tricky for both Inslee and Hickenlooper. But the second factor is, how do you break through a crowd and differentiate yourself when pretty much all of these candidates are very, very similar when it comes not only to thinking that the country will be better off without Donald Trump as president, but also the issues that they care about. There are differences in terms of which issues they're prioritizing, but if you were to look at the top 5 or 6 concerns of all of them, there would be a very, very high level of correlation.
To talk about that Joe Biden wild card as the anticipation continues to mount as to whether he will or won't, we've seen across the country any number of polls that question whether Americans want a president or a presidential candidate of a certain age. How big is the age card?
I mean, you can get people to say that they're worried about things hypothetically, but it's very difficult to then see how that translates. So, Bernie Sanders falls into that category too, yet he's polling at the top of a lot of these lists. So, people are concerned about age. All else equal, they would probably like somebody younger, but all else is not equal. And if Joe Biden is perceived as having the best shot at defeating Donald Trump, if he's perceived as being the person who can sort of right this ship and bring us back to the good old days of the Obama administration, if he's perceived as somebody who can go to Wisconsin and Minnesota and Pennsylvania and Michigan and make sure that working class voters cast Democratic ballots, then sure, everybody would prefer it if he was 55, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to matter.
And finally, let's go back to last weekend, which folks are still talking about. President Donald Trump's unscripted, off-the-cuff remarks at CPAC.
I mean, I have to say that if viewers have 2 hours and 12 minutes to kill, I really think this is an amazing way to spend it. Because there are so many things that happened during that speech that epitomize what this administration believes and the tone in which they've advocated for their principles. And it's, I think, very, very worrisome. You know, just days after Donald Trump said that he was going to take Kim Jong-un at his word, he then goes on stage and says that there are members of Congress who are Democrats who don't love our country and who don't want to do the right thing. And so those kinds of juxtapositions, I think, are pretty shocking. And he also did it in a way where he was a little bit unhinged, not only because he literally embraced the American flag, like physically, but also because of the language that he used. I mean, it's not, you know, the audience was not a PG audience.
Well, we have plenty to look forward to. Unfortunately, we are going to miss you next week because colleges do go on spring break and it's UVA's turn. But we do appreciate, as always, you're taking the time to Skype up to us here in Providence. We look forward to catching up with you in the near future. Jennifer Lawless at UVA, thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay, don't go anywhere. We're going to get a little more local here. We're going to talk writing with Dr. Ed Iannicelli. Weekly contributor on GoLocal is going to pop right here in studio in just a moment, so don't go anywhere. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us this Tuesday afternoon. I'd like to welcome in a familiar face if you've been reading Go Local on a regular basis. We now have a regular contributor in the way of Dr. Ed Iannicelli. Thank you for coming back in
Thanks,
today.
Kate. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.
I appreciate your coming back because the last time we had you in, it was sort of your pre-regular appearance on Go Local. You had just published your latest book.
Yes.
Came in here to promote that as well, but then we lured you over to publish portions of your writing on Go Local. And I just want to start off with, what's the reaction been? What are you hearing from folks?
Well, I started writing, I think, in late November for Go Local, and I'm overwhelmed with the amount of responses that I get from people, both on my email, both on Go Local site, on the Facebook site, and I'm compelled to answer them. So I appreciate the responses, and you'll hear from me.
And how much of, we were talking about this in the green room a little bit, do folks really relate to a lot of the common experiences of which you write? You know, so much obviously taken from your youth, but a lot of Rhode Islanders say, oh my gosh, I so relate to this, I know that place.
They do.
I mean, it's the 6 degrees of separation are now what, like a half?
Much less. Well, people tell me the same thing every time I write the story. You wrote my story. And I say to them, write your own story, because it's the same. I write a lot about the 40s and 50s in Rhode Island, and now I'm writing more about current things, but it's a small state, it's a small place where people know each other and have the same experiences. It cuts across all cultures.
So when you put that pen to the paper, or on the keypad, if you will, what's your approach to writing? When you say, I want to put something forth, does it have to hit you when you sit down? Are you disciplined and have a dedicated time that you are going to be writing?
Yeah, I have a dedicated time. I'm disciplined enough. But I think of so many things. There are so many topics that you can write about that. When I write, I want to put the reader in the middle of the story, in media res, as they say. I want them to feel what I'm feeling, so I write in a descriptive way after I get an idea of what to write about. The last one I wrote about was, I wish I knew how to whistle.
Yes.
So I'm thinking of whistling when I was a kid and I wasn't able to do it. And now I hear from so many other people who say the same thing. I wish I knew how to whistle.
Wish you knew how to whistle, and you did have was it the Lauren Bacall reference?
Yeah, the reference to the Lauren Bacall, Humphrey Bogart, To Have and Have Not movie, when she said, just pucker your lips and blow. I'm not talking about that kind of whistle. But everybody relates to that.
But it is, again, those commonalities, as you said.
Yes.
People say, you've written my story, but you say, write your own story. And you also do quite a bit of teaching.
I do. Well, I did teach when I was in practice. I taught at medical school. But now what I try to do in my presentations, and I give a lot of them in a lot of different places, is try to encourage people to write their story. Look at their pictures, because there's a lot to glean from pictures, and you can make a story from a picture. To look at their own pictures and decide how they want to tell their story, how they want to have a legacy of story. So that's really what I teach. I try to teach them the style of how you devise a topic, how you describe the topic, how you look at pictures and do it.
So is that really a big basis for your writing, is kind of photo-driven, things that jog your memory of, oh my gosh, I almost forgot about that, or oh, I need to tell this story. As you said, really looking at those photos to really give you that inspiration.
It's a great resource, and you got to get those photos from the drawers and from the shoe boxes. What I did was get all the photos I could from all the relatives that I could get them from, and from my own family, and scan them into the computer. Now, when I write about my dining room when I was a kid, I don't remember what the wallpaper looked like, but I have a photo that helps me describe what's there. And then I get more ideas from that. So it's a resource, and a necessary resource, I think, for my writing.
So every week we do publish Dr. Iannicelli, and here we are. It is March of 2019. What can we expect from you in the writing realm this coming year, Doctor?
Well, I have you can't believe I must have 100 different ideas and different topics to write about. So I'm not going to run out of material. And every day, if you look around when you're walking down the street, or you're in a restaurant, or you're listening to a conversation, or you're in a museum, there's so much to see and absorb and then to write about. So it goes on and it'll continue. I could write about what I'm doing right now, Kate. Be careful. One never knows.
Actually, we did have a woman, Wendy Fashion came on. She's a great advocate for her deceased son, Neil. Came on for the Jester and Farley Fund, and she wrote on her own blog afterwards, having come on, and sort of that experience of being in front of the camera and looking at yourself after the fact and like, oh, and I do it all the time too. What could I do better? Like what, finding those little tips and trying to do that as well. So as you said, take any opportunity to bring your real life into writing as well. And I saw that picture of you in the class lately. What was that photo that you had posted with some students?
I have a friend at Providence College. He's a professor of biology, Dr. Yin-Ching Wan, who's become a good friend. And every year, it's really interesting. Every year he invites me to speak to the class of biology seniors. The first year I went in, it's maybe the third or fourth year now, the first year I went, I thought I would talk about the stomach and intestines. And within 2 sentences of my presentation, the student said to me, what was it like when you came here to Providence College? Why did you come to Providence? And why are you writing? And tell me about your career. So 2 hours were taken up, and they are every single class, by those questions about my career. And I think they're looking at their future as they ask me questions.
Oh gosh, how important is that? Having come from the field of medicine and obviously an accomplished writer as well, for those aspiring doctors to sort of maybe take the holistic look at life and how that interplays with just the myopic look at medicine.
Absolutely, you're taking care of people. You're not taking care of a liver. You're not taking care of a heart. You're taking care of a person who comes with all kinds of issues in addition to their physical and maybe mental issues. They have a lot of things that they need to relate to the physician. So it's really important that you're a physician first. That's what I tell the students. You're a physician first. You're a healer first. You're a listener first. And then you're a doctor. And then you're a specialist. And then you're a subspecialist. But above all, you're a physician. So people need to know how to listen, how to understand. Sir William Osler, who founded the Johns Hopkins Medical School, said, listen to the patient. They're telling you the diagnosis. And that's critical, and I try to tell the students that all the time.
Well, clearly you've always had your eyes and ears open, from a successful career in medicine to, again, an equally one in writing that we so enjoy being able to feature here
Having a ball.
on GoLocal Prof. So be sure to catch in every week to catch Dr. Ed Inicelli. And we're going to bring him into the studio regularly because he has quite the following on GoLocal of a fan club, that does love to read him every week. Have you heard from other people like you might not have heard from your years past, and they just say, Dr. Inicelli, there you are.
Absolutely. That's what I love the most about this writing. I hear from people that I haven't seen or heard from in years, and they say the same thing. You're telling my story. It's great to see you. Nice to see you there. Let's have coffee. If I can't have enough coffee with all the people who want to have coffee and talk about writing. Everybody wants to be a writer.
Well, if you want to be a writer, there's no better writing than to check out Dr. Inicelli on GoLocal Prof. Doctor, thank you for taking the time to come in.
My pleasure.
We're going to tack back to politics here, downtown Providence, in just a moment, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Go Local Live. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for Tuesday afternoon news, literature, and politics. We got some national news from UVA, but now we're going to get very local here with Rachel Flum with the Economic Progress Institute.
Hello, Kate.
Thanks for coming back in.
Thanks for having
A
me.
regular. This is probably, I was got to say, 3, 4, maybe 5 times now.
Oh, we have.
Catching you here downtown before tomorrow, being up at the Rhode Island State House for the Women's Economic Justice Platform with a number of stakeholders regarding a number of pieces of legislation that you're going to be advocating for. I'm assuming you're expecting a big turnout.
Yes, we certainly hope so. Although today's reproductive rights hearing at the State House, hopefully everybody remembers to come back tomorrow for the other bills that we're going to talk about.
Okay, things that are going to be talked about: minimum wage increase to $15, closing the wage gap, protecting against sexual harassment, access to affordable health care, and improving the Paid Family Leave Act. Let's start with that last one because that was qualified by many as a win last session, that was approved. But now you're looking to what you say is improve upon it. What needs to be tweaked in this, in your opinion?
Sure. So this is actually a little bit different than what we talked about last year. That was around paid sick days. So when you need to take an hour or so to go see the doctor, or when you catch the flu, which lots of people have done recently, and you need to take a day off or two to take care of yourself. This is actually about paid family leave. So if you need to take a week off because your elderly mother broke her hip and you need to help support her at home, or after the birth of a new child, or bringing a new child into the home. So this, right now, the paid family leave is called the Temporary Caregiver Insurance, TCI, and Rhode Island has 4 weeks of paid leave, but it's only 60% of wage replacement. So that means that when you're out on leave, you only get about 60% of your wages. And so we know, especially for low-income Rhode Islanders, often they're paying in because this is an employee-funded fund. So all of us are paying about 1% into the fund, but lower income folks aren't able to access the leave. And so this legislation this year would both increase the number of weeks up to 8 weeks, and then also increase the amount of wage replacement.
Okay, let's talk about the increase in the minimum wage. Now this is sponsored by Marcia Ranglin-Vassell and Senator Quezada.
Yes, so our minimum wage in Rhode Island just went up to $10.50, but we at the Economic Progress Institute actually do a report every other year, that looks at what it really costs to live here. And Rhode Island is a high cost state, and so a single person needs to be earning at least $13 an hour just to meet his or her basic needs. And we know that about a quarter of minimum wage workers are actually parents, so they have much increased costs for that. So there's a coalition of folks that was working last year and working this year to try to get the minimum wage up to $15 an hour over a number of years. Massachusetts just has that progression they passed last year, so by 2024 they'll be at 15. And so we think it makes sense, since we're so close to the border of Mass, to do a similar increase so that by July of 2024 we would be at 15. And also it would eliminate the tipped wage, which is an important part of that conversation as well, because we know tipped wage earners, there's that whole gender equality piece to that as well. Tipped workers are supposed to be taking home whatever the minimum wage is, but often the dynamics of that that's not the result of what they're actually taking home.
Let's talk a little bit, I know we've discussed this before as well, because you go up and testify, other folks go up and testify. You also hear from the flip side, sometimes a lot of small business owners, small business organizations that say, we can simply absorb being told that we need to be able to pay this. What's your response to that when you hear those folks that come up and you've heard their testimony?
Right. Well, I mean, we know that because Massachusetts is going up, and what we often hear from folks is that they're not able to plan for minimum wage increases. So this bill actually allows them to plan. It's a progression over time so that they know where they're going. We also know that most minimum wage workers are actually in larger employers, and so they are better able to absorb that cost. And so we think that this is, the predictability especially is fair and makes it something that small businesses can figure out over time.
And let's talk about closing the wage gap.
Yeah, so this is Women's Month, and unfortunately we know that women are still only being paid about 80% of men's wages, and there are a number of pieces of why that's true. It's not just that I decide to hire someone and pay the woman less than the man, but it's other things like when you first get your first job, your employer may ask, well, what did you make at your last job, and then decide what to pay you based on that. And the result is women often are starting off with lower wage jobs, and so the cumulative effect is that they end up with lower wages over time. So this would really get at that, in that you aren't able to ask what someone made at their last job. You cannot forbid your employees from talking about what people are making. So, and of course, you're not able to just pay men and women for comparable work unequally. So it gets at several pieces of that, and this is especially important for women of color. We just produced a infographic with the Women's Fund that shows for Latina women and Black women that the wage gap is really extreme, and so we hope that both minimum wage increase and looking at these fair wage legislation can really help improve that situation.
And one of the proposals too is addressing sexual harassment. There's a number of proposals. There's actually, looks like 10.
Yeah, so that's really the Sexual Harassment Commission from last year introduced this slate of proposals. So that is really just the slate of all of them together, just to try to get at addressing not being able to discriminate and making sure that there's fair processes and all of those things. So we think that's fair.
Were there any gains made last year, or let's talk where we are in 19, because we're looking here. It seems like a plethora that still needs to be addressed.
Right. Well, we know. I mean, one of the reasons we decided to do this event tomorrow is that last year was not a great year for women at the State House, and at the end of the day, there weren't a whole host of things that anyone can point to that advanced women. And so we thought it was important to bring all of these together to say all the women in the state need at least some of these, right? So there's childcare you may need, you may have caregiving that you need to deal with, you may be underpaid or dealing with sexual harassment. So we're hopeful that some of these will move forward this year, and we thought it was a good thing to put them all together and to have a platform to say, women's justice, while reproductive rights is a huge part of that, it's not just about that. It's about all these other pieces as well.
So you want to make sure you encourage folks who are interested in any facet of these pieces of legislation to turn out in support tomorrow. Did we hit them all here?
Well, so the couple we didn't hit, there's child care assistance, so ensuring that our child care providers are adequately paid, because we know women and men too need child care in order to go to work. And we also know that the providers are often underpaid. And then the last one is for our lowest income folks. The program is called Rhode Island Works. There are only about 4,000 families who are supported by Rhode Island Works, but and that's our welfare program. And so there's some proposals to get rid of a short time limit. We have one of the shortest time limits in the whole country, and we really want people to be able to get the skills they need to have family supporting wages at the end of the time that they're on their welfare program. So there are two pieces of legislation that would eliminate that short time limit so that people are able to get the skills that they need and support their families.
So again, a number of pieces of legislation. We'll be sure to put up the links to them as well when folks come back and watch after the fact. Clearly gearing up for a big day tomorrow at the State House. But do you want to give us a little insight as to maybe what to expect from the Economic Progress Institute in the next few weeks and months?
Sure. So we have a legislative agenda that looks at many of these things. We're also pushing for the earned income tax credit, which I've talked to you about before, because that's another way of raising wages for lower income families, but is not business supported. It's really state supported. So we're going to continue to work on that. We have some affordable health insurance pieces, some protections that we're trying to support and work on. We're also having a big conference in May, the beginning of May, that talks about supporting immigrants in the state. Especially under this Trump administration, there has been a chilling effect for immigrants feeling comfortable coming out and accessing health care and the benefits to which they are entitled. And so we're having someone from the National Immigration Law Center come and talk about what's happening on the national level, and then what state agencies are doing locally to support our Rhode Islanders.
Well, as always, plenty coming out of the Economic Progress Institute. I'm so glad you were able to come in here today, tell us a little bit about what's in store at the Rhode Island State House tomorrow with the focus on the Women's Economic Justice Platform. Again, we'll have links to all of those bills as well if you're interested in going or learning more. So Rachel Flum, thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate it. That just about wraps up another day here in downtown Providence for Go Local Live. Of course, tune in tomorrow at 3 o'clock for Laura Afonso for the best with food and drink. And we'll be back here soon. In the meantime, catch Go Local online. Catch us on Facebook on golocalprov.com. I'm Go Local News Editor Kate Nagel.